Hello guys, my name is SVB and I'm back with another video, and today we're going to be discussing a topic that's received some growing attention in the Overwatch community. That is, the implementation of a potential pick-ban system, also known as Captain's Mode. Now, I've made a video before where I mentioned the idea, but since then I've had the chance to actually playtest what this pick-ban system would look like in Overwatch in both private tests with my mods and a public test with the players on my Discord server. Today I'm going to share with you my observations and what I've learned, and I'll do this by addressing both the pros and the cons of potentially implementing this system into the game. Is it counterintuitive to what Overwatch is? Will it ruin the game? Will it make things too restricted? I'll be answering all these questions and more, so let's get to it guys. Now let me be upfront and say that I think the system is a great idea and will transform Overwatch for the better. So in this video, I'll be trying to talk through common criticisms, and I'll also try my best to give them fair representation, but I'll be explaining why I think these cons are outweighed by the pros. But before we do that, let me quickly run over what the system is for those of you who are unfamiliar. If you think you already know about the pick-ban system and want to skip to just the pros and cons discussion, then follow the timestamp on your screen right now. So many other games, particularly MOBAs like Dota and League of Legends, but also shooters like Rainbow Six Siege, have some form of picking and banning in their competitive modes. This is basically a system which allows players to ban certain heroes so that they cannot be played for the entirety of the game, and pick others, which means that only their team can play that hero. These are usually done in a drafting session where teams take turns making these selections, and it results in a sort of pre-game chess match where each team is trying to outthink and outpick the other. The selections are done by designated team captains, which is where the name Captain's Mode comes from. But in most of these games, of course, the hero pools are larger, and exclusive picks have always been a part of their game. So would this work in Overwatch with its limited hero pool and free choice? Well, there's no definitive answer yet, but I think it would. We're still fiddling with the exact details and the numbers, but I'll give you some examples that we've been using on my Discord server that have worked well so far. At the moment, we've been trialing two different modes, the first of which we've called Full Pick. In Full Pick mode, both teams draft a pool of 11 heroes, 3 tanks, 3 supports, and 5 DPS, and they get to ban 1 hero each. So if the red team goes first, they'll start with a ban, then the blue team will get 1 ban, then they'll also get the first pick. After this, the red team will 2-pick heroes, and then both teams will take turns picking 2 heroes until finally the blue team gets 11, and the red team will get 1 final pick when they make it to 10. Each team's 11 picks are exclusive to that team, and the remaining 7 heroes cannot be used by either team, including the 2 that were banned from the beginning. To make the system work, there are a couple other rules in place as well. Firstly, you can't ban more than 1 support or 1 tank in total. This is simply because there aren't enough of these heroes in the game. Secondly, we realized that being able to pick both tanks in one turn, for example, was too strong. So in any turn where you get 2 picks, you have to pick 1 DPS and 1 other hero. So for example, you can't pick Ryan Zarya off the bat or Sigma Orisa, but you could pick Reinhardt Mei. Still a good combo, but not unfair to be picked together. That's one mode. The other mode, which is a little lighter on the restrictions, is called Open Pool. In Open Pool mode, teams only get to pick a total of 5 heroes each, these being 1 tank, 1 support, and 3 DPS. They each still get 1 ban, but the remaining 19 heroes are available for both teams to pick. So to summarize what that means, you basically have 5 exclusive heroes each, 2 bans, and everyone else is as normal. Again, a similar set of rules apply to make this format work, which is that you can't ban more than 1 tank or support, and you have to pick a DPS every round, just to keep things balanced and symmetrical. This mode is more of a halfway house between Full Pick and more suited to players who don't like the restrictions so much. So these are just some rough ideas for how it would be implemented. Like I said, we're still testing these and working on the numbers. If you're curious about joining in with that, then follow the link in the description to my Discord and come along for the experimental pickup games we run on Fridays. And if you have some ideas or suggestions, please drop them in the comments, because we're constantly trying to tweak and perfect the format. But now, let's actually talk about what a Captain's Mode would bring to Overwatch and what its potential drawbacks could be. I'll start with the most common complaint I hear. It's not Overwatch. This is by no means the strongest argument against Captain's Mode, and I don't want to do its detractors any disservice. There will be better ones later, but it's the one that I think is the most common and the most instinctual for Overwatch players. It's not a scientific analysis as much as it is a gut instinct, and it deals with a rather philosophical question of what is Overwatch. The thing about the complaint is that it doesn't really match up with reality. Part of it refers to the classification of Overwatch itself, and I'll add, Overwatch is not a MOBA under this as a sub-complaint. Firstly, they're right. Overwatch is not a MOBA, but it's also not a straight-up shooter. It is, and always has been, a hybrid, and is drawn on elements from both genres throughout its creation and release. There's no need to wrestle to pull it to one side or the other. Ultimately, we should just be trying to make the game the best it can be, If that means drawing on elements from MOBA games, then so be it. It's not a cardinal sin. The second part of this complaint alludes to the idea that Overwatch is a game about flexibility, and that in particular, switching to counter the enemy's team comp is integral to the game. This may have been true about how Overwatch was designed and sold to us, and maybe even was the case early on in the game's life, but it's absolutely not true of the game we've been playing for the last few years. First, let's look at the pro level. This argument holds almost no water when you watch any Overwatch League or even tier 2 and 3 Overwatch for multiple reasons. Firstly, pros like to stick to the meta. They like to find the strongest collection of 6 heroes and run them almost unanimously on every map on attack and defense for the entirety of their matches. This is because, primarily, there will always be a strongest comp. Now that we've got 31 heroes, there's no way that devs will be able to balance them all equally so that they're all perfectly matched. Something will always rise to the top. On top of that, Overwatch is a game that relies heavily on the concept of ultimate economy. The amount of swing factor that ultimates bring to a fight, sometimes outright making it impossible to win one, means that switching heroes is generally a bad idea, particularly on a big scale. Let's say you're on a hybrid map. Point A usually has geography suited for ground pound based comps. Point B will usually contain lots of high ground, which would lend itself well to a mobility based comp. But the ult charge you lose if you did a complete swap from A to B means you'll probably end up in a cycle where the enemy team constantly has ultimates to use on you while you're stuck spending ages to trying to build yours. Rather than waste all that time to win one fight, you may as well stick with your first comp and use the ultimates you have in hand and win the fight that way. That's certainly how the pros see it. So it's pretty clear that even at the highest level, when entire teams are coordinated and communicating and obviously understand different strategies, switching is still a completely minimal and almost non-existent part of the game. Particularly now that we have role lock in place, there's no real disadvantage to playing the strongest 2-2-2 comp because the enemy can try and get wonky with a 3 DPS or triple tank comp to try and beat you. They would have to run suboptimal 2-2-2 comps and hope they get value, which is unwise to say the least. Then if you look at ladder, where all of us plebs are, it's just as bad for different reasons. In the highest tiers of ladder, players still want to play meta like the pros, meaning we go back to the same issues I just mentioned. Why switch and why play anything other than the meta? And in the metal ranks, where the majority of the player base is, the games there have been and always will be a mess. Even though the meta comps are rarely played in tiers like gold and platinum, if you're in one of these ranks, I want you to seriously ask yourself, when was the last time your team switched its entire comp to counter an enemy team's comp? Think about it, because I've seen hundreds of games through VODs and through pub games that I host, and I can probably only think of a single digit number of times I've seen a team lose a fight, go to spawn, and switch their comp around entirely. The most counter switching you'll ever get is people flaming their DPS to switch to Widow to counter the Pharah, or Reaper to counter their fat tanks. The coordination is so poor in those ranks that getting people to switch an entire comp is basically impossible, let alone getting them to actually play that new comp well. Meta amnesia, where players forget to play any comp that isn't meta, is very much a real thing. So between the one-tricks, the throwers, the people tilted from their previous games, and the people who aren't even communicating with you, how many people are entering a game fully prepared to switch their comp and playstyle to what their team actually needs? When you think about it, it's just depressing more than anything. And in the pick-pan system, you can still switch. In both the full pick and open pool modes we've been trialing, for example, you still have more heroes to draw on. But as I've hopefully demonstrated, all you really need is a few situational swaps. Switching comps around entirely is not something that makes sense too often. And this brings me to the first pro of the pick and ban system. It forces diversity. This is something that Jeff Kaplan actually alluded to in a Q&A session at BlizzCon, and although I disagree with his reasonings, I agree with the end product. He felt that the reason pros play the same comps all the time is because they're too rigid and essentially don't think outside the box enough. I can't say I agree with him, but what he spoke about was needing to create a system to force players to actually play different comps. This is absolutely needed in Overwatch. Without actually giving the players the ability to remove heroes from the game, or at least deny the enemy team from picking them, you will never stop there being a dominant meta comp which will always be played. And without exclusivity, you'll also never stop the never-ending battle of mirror comps. I mean, who here isn't bored of just watching pro teams spam the same cooldowns from the same heroes over and over till the end of time? What is the point of having Overwatch League teams with all these diverse brandings and niche rosters if every single one of them plays the same 6 heroes anyways? What's the difference between one and the other? As long as you allow unrestricted picks, the pros will always find one meta comp and they will play it non-stop, and you can't blame them for doing it. If you introduce picking, banning, and exclusive picks, then you might actually see a huge diversity of playstyles appear. When forced to not play the meta, teams might genuinely surprise you with how good they are at off-meta comps. And then, you might have these exciting situations where teams become famous for the kinds of wacky, non-standard compositions they can make work. Torb Sim Dive? Sounds dumb, but wow, they made it work. And for anyone concerned that they will miss out on potentially seeing their favorite players play their favorite heroes, well, first of all, sorry to break it to you, but that already happens. Unless their signature hero happens to be in the meta, you are not going to see your star player ever play it. Brig Jail taught us this. But in this new format, how do you stop the best players when most of them are great at multiple heroes? Oh, you want to ban Sinatra's Doomfist? Well, guess what? He'll pop on Tracer too. You want to stop Jonak from playing Zenyatta? Well, he was the #1 ranked player in Korea on Ana, so prepare to be purple for the entirety of the game. Honestly, this would actually increase how frequently you get to see your favorite players play the heroes they want to play and not what the meta dictates of them. And this brings me to my follow-on point. It lets players control their own meta. As I mentioned earlier, expecting the devs to keep the growing hero pool perpetually in balance is firstly unrealistic, but secondly also completely ignores the entire history of Overwatch. If there's one thing we know about the Overwatch devs, it's that they will take forever to buff or nerf problematic heroes. 2 years of GOATs and what feels like an eternity of double shields has already made this crystal clear. Personally, I'm sick of waiting for the devs to intervene every couple months when inevitably some lame comp becomes dominant and kills the enjoyment for the actual community. Why not let the players do it themselves? Not only does this make the devs' lives easier, but it also addresses multiple other issues. Firstly, balancing heroes for different skill sets. A hero like Tracer, for example, was a must pick at the pro level for ages because of how much value a highly skilled player could get out of her. But was she a problem in low ranks? No, because no one in gold could get that kind of value. So the devs might look at a hero and think, 100% pick rate in Overwatch League? That's bad, let's nerf her. But that would ignore that for most of the players, she's not a problem. The same thing happened with Reaper and Doomfist in the opposite way before they became meta. Players in the low ranks hated them because they were basically taking over games. But at the pro level, they never got picked. You could get way more value from other heroes, so there was no issue there. In pick ban, each rank and each player can ban to their own needs. Right now, we've buffed Reaper so that he's OP in every rank, and that's just dumb. Instead, just let players in the metal ranks ban him, and let the pros ban Tracer, and you don't need to buff everybody to be viable in all ranks. And that way, everybody's happier. Secondly, it also addresses the perception problem, which is another thing that Jeff mentioned in his Q&A. A lot of the time, the devs will feel a character or comp is balanced, but the community has a different stance. Well, now the community can ban a hero they feel is overpowered, even if the devs maintain that it's not. Again, everybody's happy. Give the players a say in their own game. The discussion of heroes, though, leads me to the next potential con of the pick ban system. There's another frequently used argument, and honestly, it is probably the strongest argument against implementing the system right now. There aren't enough heroes. Unlike MOBA games, Overwatch doesn't have a 50 to 100 odd hero pool, which means that banning a lot or making many of them exclusive picks can severely reduce the choice you have to pick from. On top of this, most of the heroes at the moment are quite unique and don't overlap their skill sets too heavily. It's only recently that we started seeing heroes like Ashe and Sigma get introduced to the game who are similar to heroes we already have and either just do more than their predecessors, as is the case with Sigma, or try to fit a very specific niche, as is the case with Ashe. Honestly, this is an argument I genuinely agree with. As things stand, with 31 heroes, you have to be very careful with the pick ban system, and particularly in the tank line, playtesting has already shown me that there's potential for teams to get stuck or frustrated. However, we're not trying to make Captain's Mode a thing right now. It's not something that I, nor anyone advocating for it I think, is saying needs to be implemented immediately. Personally, I think it would be perfect to introduce it alongside Overwatch 2, which we can only hope drops at some point in late 2020. We know there's going to be at least 5 new heroes, and generally, hero releases are one of the few things we can count on the devs to continually do. Even with just 2 to 3 more tanks, I think Overwatch would be absolutely ready for pick and bans in terms of size of the hero pool. We've already got plenty of DPS, but now that we're stuck in 2-2-2, we need a few more ways for tanks to be able to protect their teams. But, as it is, we're always going to be increasing the roster, so why not prepare for what is likely to be the inevitable future of the game? Why not implement it early and have a community that learns together rather than waiting till everyone is mad at the devs or bored of the game before the change is finally made? In fact, ironically, the people who are saying that more heroes should be dropped before we implement pick ban should know that the more heroes we add, the harder the game becomes to manage in terms of balance, in which case my earlier point about letting the community handle the balancing stands to reason again. And on the flip side, there is one positive that I think is really undeniable about the system, and that would, in my opinion, really shift the focus of ranked play in Overwatch towards the right direction. Captain's Mode values game knowledge and tactics very, very highly. To some people, this might sound like their worst nightmare, but to me, and to I hope the people watching, who dedicate their time to learning about the game and consuming as many resources to improve their knowledge as they can, this is a great thing. So what do I mean by this? Well, right now, let's say you're one of these people who's a true student of the game and knows how heroes and comps and playstyles interact. There's only really two ways for you to apply this knowledge to your game. One, you apply it to your own play. And this is obviously good and effective. I'm not going to say this doesn't help because it's the only reason I've ever climbed as high as I did. But ultimately, you're just one of 6 people. The overall impact is limited. The second way to apply your knowledge is to communicate and try to shot call for your team. Again, this is effective, but it's got caveats. Firstly, you have to be comfortable shot calling, which I know that a lot of people are not, even if they know what the right call is. Secondly, your team has to be in voice chat listening and also willing to respond to your calls and work with you. It's not to say that this never happens, but again, considering how valuable game knowledge should be in a game, you don't actually get that kind of value in the Overwatch ladder from tactics as you do from sheer technical ability, for example. I've met way more people in Masters and GM who are aim gods with no brain than I have met tactical masterminds who shoot like bots. And what that means is that there's a problem somewhere. Pick ban goes a long way to redressing this balance because it allows the players to mold the very environment of their game. If you know your hero counters, if you know your comp matchups, and if you know how to outsmart your opponents, you will have way more impact on your game in this mode than you do right now. Of course, aim gods will still pop off as they should, but it brings the balance to a much fairer level, I think. You can do this as captain, of course, but you don't have to be captain either. Again, in the playtesting, it wasn't just the captains making the calls and the decisions on what should be picked or not picked. The other 5 members frequently came up with great ideas on picks and correctly anticipated counter picks and strategies that the other team would pull out. In a way, you're forced to coordinate a lot more in this mode than ranked currently asks of you, because you literally need to know what your teammates play. As a captain, you can't just ignore the hero pool of your team, because then you're just gonna lose. And if you do that constantly as a captain, your SR will tank. So again, you're demanding more from the community. You're asking them to talk and figure out a game plan together. And generally, it was so nice in the playtest to see so much thought actually being put into Overwatch. I mean, when was the last time people actually thought about the game they were in? Like genuinely sat there and tried to maths equation chess game their Overwatch match? I honestly can't remember. But on the flip side, there is another strong counter argument to the pick ban system which relates to this. Will it be viable in regular ranked play? This is one I don't know the answer to. I mean, really no one does. We can't decide what the community will do or feel. As things stand, Captain's Mode does ask a lot more of the players than the current rank system does. Right now, all the rank really asks of you is that you turn up and play your hero and clock out for the day. You don't have to think, you don't have to communicate in any way, you don't have to switch. You're basically given no guidelines by the game beyond exist in this match. Captain's Mode admittedly is more hardcore than that. It demands that you at least understand the game to a good level. Not only does it require that you be able to play more than one hero, it also requires that you know how heroes and comps interact together. And if you don't, it absolutely will punish you. So this is when we go back to having a philosophical issue. What do we want rank to be? Is competitive play a place for the hardcore players who want to play the game in the best way possible? Or is it some place that should be accessible to anyone regardless of knowledge? Personally, I'm on the former side of the scale. There are plenty of modes in Overwatch that someone who just enjoys the game casually can play. In fact, every mode that isn't ranked fits this category. There should be at least one place in the game that is treated as a serious and competitive environment where a lack of knowledge is seen as a bad thing. If Overwatch wants to be an esport, then it needs to have that. I also think, as a community, opinions can shift all the time. At a point in time, being able to pick 6 of the same hero was considered essential to the game, but we've come a long way since then. A lot of people oppose 2-2-2, and while I still have reservations about how it's been implemented and whether there could be better solutions, such as Captain's Mode, it certainly made playing the game a lot easier for the majority of the player base, particularly quick play, which is arguably now way better than comp. So I genuinely don't know where the Overwatch community stands on this, and you guys can let me know in the comments. But I believe the community would accept a big change if they felt it was helpful to the game, and I certainly think that's what Captain's Mode will do. Will it be too punishing? Will you lose games in the picking screen? These are legitimate concerns that I know people have, but what I would say to these points is give it time. In the playtest, we had a few complaints about issues like this, where players felt that if they picked badly, they were very powerless to change the match. But ultimately, this is an issue of adaptation more than anything else. We've spent years learning Overwatch metas and how heroes work, so we can't expect to learn the meta of pick ban instantly. As with anything, only a bit of practice will make us good at it, but once we get it, it should be fairly straightforward. All it takes is playing the mode a couple times to realize there are certain meta decisions you have to make, like certain picks which are bad early on, and certain other picks that you need to counter. These kind of things are part and parcel of any competitive format. So to give you guys an example, if Sigma is banned, then don't pick Zarya as your first pick. Why? Because if the enemy team picks Reinhardt, you now have to pair Zarya with Orisa or an off tank, and none of those options are good. And if they pick Pharah, you need to make sure you have a hit scan in your pool, or if you don't have a hit scan player, for example, well, you can just take Mercy away from them. And that's where the chess game starts to form. Realizing this the hard way when you play the mode for the first time and get punished feels shitty, but it's part of the learning process. And it goes back to a point I've made on this channel before. Being punished is a necessary part of any competitive game. It's how we learn. Being punished for lack of planning or lack of knowledge feels crappy. I know it does, but it's not inherently a bad thing. If a game does that, it means that it's asking you to either up your tactics or continue to lose, and that's the way a competitive game should be. It can't and shouldn't reward you regardless of how poor a decision you make. But on the flip side, when you start to actually be rewarded for thinking on your feet and countering your opponents, I promise you it feels amazing. It feels like you're more in control of ever, and that's what pick ban kinda gives you. Too often, people watch my videos and they tell me that they learned a lot, but whatever knowledge they gain from all their YouTube studies gives them very little reward in game. They have very little control. So it's about time, I think, that Ladder actually rewarded them. But I also don't want to be elitist, nor do I want to alienate people from a game they love. So here's my solution, and although there's a million more things we could still discuss on the topic, I'll call it after this. Have Captain's Mode as an option in competitive. Again, if we go back to the MOBA model, they have multiple modes you can queue up for. Dota, for example, has a mode called All Pick, where all 10 players get to pick their heroes. There's All Random, where everybody's given a random hero and have one chance to reroll. And amongst many others, there's Captain's Mode, which is what the pros play. Why not have this in Overwatch? Implement Captain's Mode for pro play in Overwatch League, where it will clearly make the game better, and where watching these mind games play out will be fascinating, but give the general community a choice. If they don't want to play this try-hard, overly complicated mode, then give them the option to play ranked as it is now. And for the players who care a lot about the game and really want to test their ability and knowledge, give them the chance to do just that. Right now, we're forcing both these types of people to play together, and at the end of it, no one is coming out happy. So let's try and find a solution that can truly help Overwatch be everything to everyone. So that's my spiel, guys. Hope you found this video helpful, or somewhat illuminating at least. If all it did was make you mad, then do tell me in the comments what you disagree with in terms of the mode itself, or perhaps any of the arguments I made. Like I said, I've tried to be as objective and fair as I can be, but I do genuinely believe that the mode has so much potential to improve the game, and I think it probably will get put into Overwatch eventually. Whether you doubt that it'll work, or whether you're totally convinced that it will, there's no better proof than seeing it firsthand. So make sure you follow the link to my Discord to join the experimental pugs I run on Fridays, where we're trialing these modes, and if not, make sure you follow my Twitch and tune into the stream of it. As always, I want to give a big shout out to my patrons who do the awesome job of supporting me. But that's it from me. I'll be back next week with another video. See you guys soon.